Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. So happy that you're here with us today. This is Christine Westerlin with the Illinois Association of Community Action Agencies.
And Susan Wilson from CEFS in Effingham. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we're so happy that you're here with us today. We're kind of taking the series talking about Roma and then kind of putting Roma into action. Where are some of the places at the agency that you use Roma? How is it that you can dive into your community needs assessments and hopefully plant some ideas for you on process? I think it's more apparent to me now, certainly during this time of pandemic, that this is where the needs assessment becomes so important. And revisiting that needs assessment, I know that all the agencies had to do that, had to do a pandemic needs assessment, if you will, and a plan. And I applaud your efforts for doing that, given the circumstances under which we've all had to work. But here we are talking once again about community needs assessment, because I think it's a practice that we can always continuously think about and to refine and improve to tell the story of our community. And I somehow have managed to turn on my webcam. I'm going to turn it off.
We don't mind.
Well, I do. So anyway, having said all of that, Susan, I'm so happy. This is what, webinar number 10? Is that right?
Number 10. We've done 10 together. This will be the 10th. So I think we work well together.
I think so. And again, I applaud you for your willingness to join me on this journey. So just to remind everybody, we want to really give a shout out to DCEO. They support this webinar series. We really appreciate their willingness and ability to do that. So thank you to DCEO on this collaboration webinar. And here we are. You know, most of you know what we look like, but here we are once again.
Yes, sadly, that's really what I look like.
And me too. So as our custom, let's start out by saying the promise of community action. Again, you can say this aloud with us. You can say it silently, but also to reflect on what these words mean, because this is, I think, even a time now where we really need to take to heart what this promise means and how is it that we can really truly make America a better place to live. That's what community action is all about. So please. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live.
We care about the entire community,
and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. All right. Just a couple of notes about today, a little housekeeping, if you will, that this webinar is being recorded. We will place it on the ICA YouTube channel once it is complete and ready to go. So we would encourage you to share this with your colleagues, your peers. Again, we are diving into what is a needs assessment. Oh, and by the way, also you can use your dashboard to ask questions or make comments. We would love to hear from you, wouldn't we, Susan?
We would love to hear your comments. We're happy to address any questions you have. Please let us know what you're thinking and how can we help you.
Absolutely. And the other thing that I'll add, at the end of the webinar, there is a survey that will be launched. It will also be sent to you in about 24 hours in a reminder email. So we would really appreciate your taking the time to answer the 4 to 5 questions that we have in that survey. What it is that you share with us influences what we do next. So here's a definition, right, of a needs assessment. And Susan, I think this is yours, if I remember correctly.
What is a needs assessment? Well, here are 2 different definitions. The ROMA definition is it's a systematic process for creating a profile of the needs and resources of a given community or target population. Claire Higgins from New York said it is a process of collecting and analyzing a broad array of data and information to develop a comprehensive picture of a particular community. And Christine, noticed that in both of these, they stress that it's a particular group of people. It's whom do you serve and what is it that they say they need?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good distinction. And just to be very mindful of that as we walk through this presentation today, this is an opportunity when you're doing a needs assessment to really think through what it is, who is it you're serving, who is it that you need to really gather information from so we can get that big picture of who you're serving. And so these, we're just defining things. I think it's good for us to have like some common understanding of what a community needs assessment is. And here is what a community is. I know in Roma that we describe a community is a group of people with similar interests. And we see this really defined here. It's a unified body of individuals, common interests. It could be just the area itself. So we have to think very carefully and thoroughly about what communities are we serving, what is the community within the community, and to be very mindful of that.
So then what is a need? Well, a need is something that we require, something essential, something important. It's not just something we want, it's something that we have to have. So a need is something that is essential, something important, something that we have an obligation to have. And food would be one. Shelter would be one. Those are needs.
And then what is assessment? And so a little bit of a change of thinking about this. We're kind of looking at the root of the word, if you will.
Yay.
I know this makes Susan really excited about this. She loves roots of words and all words in general, right, Susan?
Yes, etymology is one of my pastimes. So there is actually an etymology.com where you can look up how any words get created or invented or evolved. And so I know this is your slide, Christine, but I will say that the root of assessment means to sit beside. And so it comes actually from someone who would sit beside perhaps a judge in a courtroom and assess what was going on. So that's how we get that word. It was invented because someone sits beside someone in charge and pays attention to what's going on. So to assess is to evaluate, review, analyze, or exam. So I hate to steal your thunder, but this is my baby.
And I'm totally fine with that. And I think what I'll just reflect, because my background is in history, is that we've been doing assessments for centuries. That is it's a word that is grounded in Latin. And so assessing is something that we must do as human beings for us to understand what our next steps are going to be.
So why do we do assessments? Well, first, we do assessments to identify gaps and overlaps in service. Second, we construct our grant proposals using the needs assessment data as evidence of local needs. And when we engage communities in defining the local problems, determining the causes of those problems, and developing the solutions to them, we increase the potential for more successful grant proposals. Because face it, we can't do our mission statements if we don't have the funds behind it.
I think you make a really good point, Susan. It's that mission statement that really drives everything that we do at a community action agency.
And if it doesn't, you should reflect on your mission statement, maybe with some Roma input.
Exactly. And I think too, it's when you see that mission statement and you could really launch your conversation when you're getting ready to do your community needs assessment by looking at that mission statement and making some assumptions about that mission, perhaps even generating some questions. Are we doing this? How do we know that we're doing this? Whenever you're considering, what you're learning as you walk through that community needs assessment process. So we know this, but we have to we're going to cover our fundamentals because I think it's really important. And we've already talked a little bit about defining its community, how a CAA has to understand geographical location. Again, you're targeting people who experience low income. So it's important that you really take the time to define that community. Again, you want to be very clear about the questions that you ask. We all know this, that it's mandated and it's completed every 3 years along with your community action plan. That is a mandate that's in the organizational standards. You are reviewed and monitored on that. You also would create a community profile. That means that you're looking at the total number that live in the community, and then of that number, who actually lives in poverty, experiences poverty, and this is where you have to gather demographic data as well. We've had a couple of questions in the past of why do we have to be so detailed in the demographic data? It's because we need to know the details to tell the story and to target populations, because one shoe does not fit every foot. And so we have to be very careful and clear on what our programming is and who is it that we're serving. Again, in this is when we have to really ask the questions, what is the data revealing to us? You also want to understand both the needs of primary and supporting customers. That's a Peter Drucker principle, really. And so we have to think about who is it that we're serving, but also who are the stakeholders that are interested. You're looking at what exists and what could be. And I think that's the most important thing to question and ask about. What do we currently have available to us? And what's our vision? What do we want to see happen? What is the possibility? You would use qualitative and quantitative data. You want to engage with your community. You don't do these in isolation. And this is where you have to really have customer input into the work that you're doing. And we also want to satisfy the customer. That is probably one of the most important parts of the community needs assessment and the community action plan, is that higher focus on customer satisfaction.
I'd like to add, it does say the information about what exists versus what could be. And I'm going to add to that what exists that not enough people are aware of. So many times when I share what I do and what CEFS does for the community, I get the response of, oh, I didn't know you did that. And I'm surprised, because we do, I thought, a very good job of promoting our services, and yet still people say, well, I wish we had this in the community. I'm like, well, we do. So you need to get your community needs assessment to ask, are you aware that we have this? So it's what is there, what should be there, and did you know that this was there?
Yeah, I think you make a really good distinction, Susan, and I appreciate you adding that. I often have said that community action is one of the best kept secrets in the world.
But it shouldn't be.
I know it shouldn't be. The work that you all do is so important, especially now. This is a time in which we're really being leaned on and looked to really provide services, and that's not an accident. That's because we're essential.
On our last webinar, we talked about tooting your own horn, and this is one of the ways to do it.
That's right. And right, that is where, when you're working with your partners and your collaborators, this is a horn tooting opportunity. Man, just maybe we should do a whole horn tooting webinar. What do you say, Susan?
Ooh, I like it.
You like that idea?
Yes.
All right.
All right, maximum feasible participation. Our customers are in the best position to express their needs. And back to etymology here, the root part, I'm ahead of myself. No, I'm not. Not a revolution, a revelation. And the root part of revelation is reveal. Again, to reveal what is the needs, what do the people say they need, and how can we fill those gaps. Also, IM 138, the organizational standards, we have to have maximal feasible participation, because we need to get as much input as possible.
And so it's no accident that in the organizational standards that the first 3 categories are about the consumer, about the customer, and looking at maximum feasible participation. And so we know what goal 1 says, right? That goal 1 is or category 1, I said goal 1. You see this, it's the Roma trainer that just oozes out of me. The community action is rooted in the belief that people with low incomes are in the best position to express what they need to make a difference in their lives. And that's absolutely right. And we talk about questions and assumptions. This is something that we know, that we profoundly have embedded in the work that we do, is that we reach out to the consumers, the customers in our communities that we serve, to ask them specifically and deeply, what is it that you need?
Maximum feasible participation, category 2, community engagement. Community action is often the backbone organization of community efforts to address poverty and community revitalization. So what do you know about the unique needs of your community? What do you know about how poverty is impacting families' ability to function? You need to use this information for leveraging funds, convening key partners, adding the voice of the underrepresented, and as a community action agency, being the central coordinator of these efforts.
Yeah, it's interesting that the word backbone is used in this phrasing of category 2, because that's truly what community action is. Sometimes the backbone, we don't see that backbone, but it is there, it supports, it manages, it reaches out, it makes the connection. There is, that word is often used when we discuss collective impact. Backbone is that common phrase, and community action is that backbone. And then finally, the community assessment in the organizational standards, or why is that not rolling off my tongue today? Category 3, community assessment, and this is what it says: that local control of federal CSBG resources is predicated, I'm underlining predicated, on the regular comprehensive community assessments that take into account the breadth of community needs, as well as partners and resources available in a community to meet those needs. This is regular assessment of needs and resources at the community level is the foundation of community action, and a vital management and leadership tool that's used across the organization and utilized by the community to set the course for the CSBG and all community resources. And I think that's a clear distinction, that the community action assessment, the community needs assessment, the community action plan is certainly driven by CSBG, but it should be across the entire agency. And I know that every agency has unique programs. Many of them are also standard programs, like heat and weatherization come to mind. Head Start certainly is one, transportation, senior programming, many other things that happen. And we need to really look across the entire agency to understand what the need is. Again, this is a time in which we have to understand from a deeper perspective what the need is in the community. And honestly, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, that community assessment is always ongoing. Again, we have to ask questions. We have to continuously ask questions in this process. And sometimes we have to make assumptions based on the data that we're gathering.
So what do you know about the unique needs of your communities? Poverty knowledge. What do you know about how poverty is impacting families' ability to function? Like I said before, what does your community know about available resources? How does your community feel about your agency's relationship with the customers? Are they satisfied? Understanding bias is a tough one. You have to avoid bias with carefully worded questions and by sampling as many people as possible. An example would be having only online surveys. If you did that, you would be eliminating anyone with access to technology. So you have to be careful that you have a broad and comprehensive sampling with maximum feasible participation, again, to make sure that you know what are the needs and what information can you gather from these people.
So what is ROMA's role in this whole assessment process? Well, here is that ROMA cycle. Once again, I think it's made an appearance in every webinar, if I'm not mistaken.
It should.
It should. It absolutely should. Because assessment is the first stage of the ROMA cycle, and it identifies these questions. Again, thinking about questions. Who are our customers? What do they value? What are the potential outcomes? Again, whenever you're engaging with your customers, asking them what their needs are, you really have to hone in on what is it that they value. And I think that's a critical question. There's many ways that you can get to that question, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the assessment is the foundation of all parts of the Roma cycle. If we don't have an assessment, if we don't understand the need, that means we will not do informed planning. Our implementation is faulty. That means our data is all messed up, to use a technical term. So we have to be very clear at the assessment up front. And to also be mindful too that assessment just isn't a one and done, that you're constantly assessing, you're constantly gathering information to inform your plans all the time. And so to be very careful about that and be, again, just think through how is it that you are assessing, and are you able to reach those voices that need to have input into your process.
Okay, connecting the foundational documents. The Community Needs Assessment, Strategic Plan, and Community Action Plan all work together, and the Community Needs Assessment should come first. If you can do that first, that's best, because it informs the strategic plan, and in turn, the strategic plan and Community Needs Assessment inform the Community Action Plan. These three are the foundational documents upon which you base your decisions and your actions and your funding.
And here it is again, the Community Action Network theory of change. And again, we've talked about this at several of our webinars. It's here again because it's essential, I really think, to your work if you would want to consider the development of a theory of change. But let's look at those two blue bubbles, if you will, core principles and performance management. So these are I think the drivers, if you will, of when we think about the community needs assessment, that we have to understand the complexity of issues around poverty. And I think that's an issue that you could probably have a discussion about that every day. You probably do when you're actually in the office and working, that you do understand and try to recognize the complexity of poverty, because it shows up differently in multiple different ways. And also, this is because we not understand that local solutions are really very much specific to local need. That we understand that family stability is that foundation for economic security, and that is the key piece of it. If you look back up to the national goals, you see that economic security shows up in almost every one of them. In goal 3, it's there, it's a little hidden, but building opportunities suggests economic security. That we really are looking at positive or systemic change. That's what we want. We want to see our systems alter and change. I think now is a good time to have a conversation to see where systems are not working and how we can make change. And it's also an opportunity to engage our local community partners and citizens in those solutions. Again, that backbone, that use of the word backbone really, I think, underscores the work that we do.
Christine, this is a really good graphic, and when I studied it, I noticed that the word on this graphic, the word local is used 4 times. That really shows the importance of local data. Now, we should use state and national data for comparison. X county has X percent, whereas the national average is Y percent. But we need to determine the specific needs of the communities we serve. So local is used 4 times, but you know what? The word community is used 12 times, just on this one graphic. So again, our community, the ones we serve, are the ones we need to communicate with.
Absolutely, Susan, and I really appreciate that you bring that forward. And again, this is an opportunity to ask questions and really, what are some of the assumptions that we make whenever we look at our mission, we look at a theory of change? What are some of the assumptions that we're making whenever we're working on our goals, our agency goals? When we think about these services and strategies, what are we assuming will happen as a result?
Okay, here we have a theory of change graphic versus a logical framework graphic. The logical framework is more direct. It's almost a logic model. If you kind of tilt it on its side and study it, it's got a lot of the same aspects or facets of a logic model. It's clear, it's straightforward, it enables us to plan with the mission goal in mind. It's easy to follow, it's easy to understand. But we know that we get roadblocks, we get epidemics, mass layoffs, closed offices we have to deal with, and we understand that our cycles are always in motion. So looking at the theory of change in this graphic, we see how we need to transition our services and how we implement them always on both graphics with the ultimate goal of helping people help themselves and each other. We still have that one goal in mind. Maybe it's just not such a direct route all the time.
And this is a graphic. I borrowed this from NASCASP because we really think we need to think about the community needs assessment in stages. You just don't pull out. I'm going to suggest this, say this out loud, so forgive me. I understand. It's easy to go back to your previous community needs assessment, your previous community action plan. You blow the dust off of it and you update it. And there's absolutely, that's fine that you do that. But I also think, too, because we see the changes that are really taking place in our communities now, that we really do need to go back and really define the scope. We really need to dig deeper into thinking, okay, are we making a difference? So then this is the scope, the assessment plan, your data plan. You use surveys and focus groups, hopefully. We'll talk a little bit more about focus groups in a bit. And then you put your report together. And this is really, this is someone who should be working alone. This should be a group, a team at the agency. And we're going to talk about that in just a couple of slides because it's so important that this work is not done in isolation. This impacts the entire agency, the entire program, and to ensure that everybody is on board with this. This is why we have to be somewhat deliberate about thinking about the staging.
Key CNA goals and activities. Assess the needs and assets within the whole community, analyze the underlying causes of poverty, identify overall service needs of populations, gaps in services, and barriers to services, determine if agency programs match community needs, support strategic planning and develop program priorities, strengthen relationships with key partners and stakeholders, build awareness of community action. We talked about that earlier, Christine. I'm going to focus on it again. Build awareness of community action and its services and support the need for funding, and develop community consensus on policy agenda. If I were to break this down into the important verbs, you assess the needs and assets, you analyze the causes of poverty, you identify gaps and barriers to services, you collaborate to build awareness, and then you determine on what programs are not meeting the needs. So it's do. That's what we've got to do to get this, to meet our mission.
Absolutely. So looking at just the kind of that bigger overview, you really do want to plan for the assessment. Again, the plan may be already laid out in front of you if you're looking at a previous plan that you've put together or your needs assessment together, but you need to plan for the assessment. Who are we going to talk to? How are we going to gather this information, both data, both quantitative and qualitative data? That's where do we do surveys? And as Susan said, we just can't do all online surveys. We have to be very mindful of individuals who may want to share their voice but may not have access to technology. How do we do that? What's the easiest way to do that? We have to have both qualitative and quantitative data. You want to analyze the data. What's the story that this data is telling us? Where is it that we need to, marshal our resources around emerging issues? You also want to prepare and communicate the report. That's important too. Again, this to me is the entire agency has to at least have access to it. More than likely they do. So there's an understanding, a broad understanding across the entire organization. This is why we do what we do. And because, again, people make assumptions. They ask questions. Why are we doing this? I don't understand. This is where the assessment can really bring that all together. And then an important piece of this too, it's in the organizational standards, but your community action board, the tripartite board, again, with that principle of maximum feasible participation with the tripartite board, that the board votes to accept the community needs assessment and that community action plan, and it is recorded in the minutes of the meeting.
So who's going to be working on this community needs assessment? You'll need to select a team, a select group that will set the direction and provide oversight, include feedback for what's been going on. Your ROMA professional is the key member of the team with training specific to the ROMA cycle, and that includes assessment. So this is another shameless plug to get in a ROMA professional, but your ROMA implementer is trained for things like this and can give you valuable, extremely valuable input. Your team will facilitate linkages with other community entities and help analyze the data. They will assist in the long haul for implementation and follow-up. The team develops the budget for the community needs assessment. So gather a group that includes people such as your ROMA professional, fiscal, program managers, coordinators, directors. It takes a group of people. This is a big undertaking. If you've done it before, you know it is. So gather your best people. And of course, that would include your ROMA professional, right, Christine?
Absolutely. And if you want to learn more about becoming a ROMA professional, reach out to me or to Susan and be more than happy to have a conversation with you about that. I will say too, and I think it might be in a slide coming up, but when you're facilitating that linkage with your community leaders, you have community leaders on your community action boards. So ensure, if you feel comfortable, if it's already embedded in your process, have a board member be a part of that team. Oh, there it is. Who should be on the team? I'm always jumping ahead of myself. But again, as Susan said, there's that list. So you want to have all these folks. But again, you also are encouraging that you have to have community partners and also expert consultants. I know that some agencies do use expert consultants to do some insight. They may connect with somebody who perhaps does community needs assessments as their job. You know, there are many consultants that do that. And also just to say that there are other organizations that do community assessments in your community. We don't do this, we're not the only organization that does a community needs assessment. It is done by almost every other social service organization. Head Start does a community needs assessment. We know departments of public health do assessments. We know that healthcare organizations do assessments. So it's tapping into those other allies that you have in the community will really probably bring forward richer and data that you could use in your own community needs assessment.
So potential supporters, who else is interested in the community needs assessment data? Public agencies, other service providers, United Way, educational institutions, community foundations. Use the research and the wisdom of the local United Way and others. Share your demographic information with them. Share your reported needs and referral information. Don't do this alone, and there's no sense to reinvent the wheel. What United Way has studied, what the hospital system has determined are some needs, you can share that information, share what you know, and they'll share with you what they know. And this data is important because we all have, the ultimate goal of your community being safe and efficient and healthy with stability. And so get the information for the other people and share your information with them. And I've said this before, make sure it's local data. Some things like state, national information is really good for comparison, but find out what's going on in your community and get that information from other entities in your community.
So what are some of your next steps? So we had the realization when we were putting together this presentation that we would keep you for hours if we were to go into detail about community needs assessments. It's a big deal for the agency to do. So this is a way for you to get started. And we also have a couple of resources that we'll share with you that will help you dive deeper into this. But you do want to consider your data plan. What are we going to gather? What are we going to analyze? How are we going to analyze it? There are, your Roma professional would be a key piece. Those Roma professionals learn about data analysis and how to assist with that. You also want to develop your surveys and focus groups. I can tell you that there are an amazing amount of materials out there on the internet that help you develop those surveys, asking perhaps some open-ended questions, especially in a focus group format. I know that focus groups are something that we're exploring, and we'll offer some learning around the upcoming, and once we are back and running with our next DCEO contract. So watch for those. Again, you're sorting the data, you're reviewing the data. Again, that you begin developing the plan. You also want to ensure that the team is working together. Again, it's so important that you do have a team that works on the community needs assessment and the community action plan, because it can't be done in isolation. It has to have other eyes and other wisdom that's brought to the table to really dive into the needs, really, when you're thinking about the needs of the community. You want to finalize the plan and send it to the agency ED or identified point person. Again, you have board approval. You do upload that community needs assessment and the community action plan into STARS. We know that. That you want to continue to use and refer to the plan routinely. And I want to stress that the most. I think that, I shouldn't say I think, I know that the conditions in our communities are constantly changing. So that means that the needs assessment must be ongoing, that you have to inform your plan and shift your work, because it is important for us to use that. It's a vital document. We just don't do it because it's required. We do it because it's necessary. And that you also want to identify tools to measure progress. Again, there are scales, there's other models that you can use to help measure progress. And we encourage you, again, to really work with your Roma professional to identify what those tools are.
So there are some resources available you need for reference, or don't do this alone. Use your Roma professionals and use the National Association for State Community Services Programs, Community Action Guide for Comprehensive Community Needs Assessments. Christine, there's something that let's see, I'm trying to think what we're missing.
Yeah, so right. So on the Community Action Partnership, there is an amazing amount of resource material for community needs assessments. And the one that I think that you had suggested is there's one specifically for Category 3 in the organizational standards, and that is found in this resource guide.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so don't hesitate to look at these documents. A couple of things too that the partnership has is that they have some example community needs assessments and community action plans, and I would encourage you to take a look at those. All right. Are there any questions? Are there any questions?
Yeah. Please ask us questions or let us know what you're thinking.
I think I think everybody has just come off that needs assessment and planning process on how you're going to respond to the pandemic and the additional funding that you're going to be receiving. And I really appreciate that you had to do that. You had to kind of do it on the fly, if you will. And so if somebody has any reflection who worked on that or an idea to share with us, we'd love to hear from you. Okay.
Well, we must have done such a good job that no one has any questions. We covered it so thoroughly.
That's it. But again, you know how to get a hold of Susan and I. More than happy to have conversation with you.
Okay, here we go. Can we talk about focus groups a little bit?
We can talk about focus groups, absolutely. So the use of focus groups is something that really helps you get great qualitative data. So I would encourage you to, think through your focus group process. So you want to not just do one. I would suggest that you do perhaps 3 or 4, whatever you think you want to do. You want to identify the groups that you intend to speak with. So you would probably want to talk to parents. Parents, you'd want to talk to seniors, you would want to talk to community leaders, you would want to talk to perhaps some of your other partners, again, to kind of explore questions with them and ask them what they need and to go into detail with them. Focus groups typically are done in a neutral location. You can have it at the agency. It would be difficult to do that now, but you can conduct focus groups online. You could do it on a remote platform. You could use Zoom, or you could use Google Hangouts, is it? And what's the other one? Or it's Microsoft Hangouts. Anyway, there are ways to do that. Gather. Rosa, I can send you a focus group guide too that will help you kind of dive into it. But you want to be very clear about your questions, very open-ended questions. You want to have questions that are very much targeted, again, focusing on need. Tell me more about your need. What would be helpful to you? And again, gather that. You're going to want somebody with you who's going to be busy taking notes so you can gather up all the information that you can. And what I typically do when I conduct a focus group is that I take a flip chart and then we begin gathering data based on the questions on all of those flip charts. So there is a record that everybody can see, develop in front of them, and then that continues the conversation. That was a lot of information. Susan, anything?
Well, the only thing coming to this discussion as the adult literacy coordinator, you might consider immigrants as a group, perhaps a group of people who maybe wouldn't be able to fill out a questionnaire in English so well. That would be a good focus group to address. Someone who, a group of people who might need assistance filling out answers because English isn't their first language or because they can't read English very well for whatever reason.
Thank you. That's a great answer. I appreciate that, Susan. Thank you, Rosa, for the question. Appreciate it. Anything else to ask? All right. Well, Susan, thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for inviting me. Shameless plug number 37 for your Roma professional. You should have one. If you don't, you can ask us how to get one. But I think that would be a vital facet of your community needs assessment committee. Make it easier because that person is trained in some of the knowledge that's needed for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy to have those conversations with you. We hope that once we're all back together again, we will be out training, helping you all learn more about Roma, and we're happy to do that as well. So until next week, now I will say that Susan and I talked about this yesterday. We have pledged to continue this series through the end of June. I know that many of you are putting together your reopening plans. We know that you're going to be busy, but we want to at least talk about some other ideas with you all about how you embed Roma practices into your agency. So until we're going to do this, 3 more times?
Let's see.
Yeah, look at
how many more Wednesdays in June? The 10th, 17th, and 24th.
Okay. All right. Well, again, thank you, Susan. Thanks, everybody, for being online with us today. And again, we will make this available to you all. So take good care, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us.